Good afternoon and welcome to Earth Day Live, where we connect critical ideas and action to create positive change. I'm your host, Emily Walker. I'm the Education Coordinator at Earth Day. As we dive into our discussion, please feel free to ask questions and comment and share the link below. So today, I'm very excited about this topic. We are going to be talking about climate education. So we're talking to leaders in the field of climate education amidst the current climate crisis, the importance of discussing climate education, and it's more important than ever before. So climate education is where civic education meets action. So the understanding of Earth's climate system to address critical climate issues, it's a powerful tool we need, and today we'll provide a roadmap to understand it a little bit more. So I am really excited to introduce our guest panelists. So we are going to start with our very own Bryce Kuhn, the Director of Education at earthday.org. Welcome, Bryce.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Awesome. Thank you. Our next guest is Sarah Sterling Laldy. She's the senior Climate Change Education Advisor for the New Jersey Department of Education. Welcome, Sarah.
Hi, Emily. Glad to be with you today.
Thank you. And last but not least, Lauren Madden. She is a professor at the College of New Jersey, and she works with pre-service teachers. Welcome, Lauren.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for joining us. I'm very excited about this topic. I think climate education is very much on the headlines right now. So I would love to kind of jump in and kind of see what brought you to climate education, because it is such an important topic right now. So Sarah, can you start us off? What brought you to climate education? How'd you end up in this space?
I ended up in this space in large part because of my teaching experience in the Paterson Public Schools. So I was a student in the Paterson Public Schools and went on to become a teacher there. In my experience as a science teacher, I realized that my students responded incredibly positively to outdoor learning opportunities, and that in a lot of ways it leveled the playing field for them. Students who were challenged by the structure of sitting in a seat in a classroom could really flourish in the outdoor environment, and students who were, my A model students in the classroom were challenged by being in this new and different environment. That leveling of the playing field made for some wonderful interactions and ways for them to learn from one another. I also noticed that those outdoor learning experiences and ones that were specifically focused on ecology gave them an opportunity to start really thinking about things that were happening in their community and develop agency and voice to make changes right now in the moment that could impact their community, and that had an overall impact on their learning because as they felt that they had agency in this one area, that began to have a ripple effect on how they saw themselves in the future, on how they wanted to then participate in learning, and all of that was a really wonderful thing. So over time, that sustainability focus in my science classroom turned into me going to get a master's at NYU for environmental conservation ed, running after school programs and summer programs around the environment, and then ultimately to this position.
That's amazing. I think student agency is so important and being in charge of their learning in new ways. That's great. Lauren, over to you. How did you get into the climate education space?
So yeah, my academic background, my bachelor's and master's degrees are both in oceanography, and I did scientific research related to climate change back when I was a student and soon after. Then I made my way into the classroom and taught middle school for a while, and eventually became a science teacher educator. So my work has always been grounded in both the science side as well as the education side, issues related to science and climate change. And then I really made a purposeful shift in a lot of my work in both my teaching and my research over the last 5 to 10 years or so to focus directly on K-5 climate change education and sort of bring together all of the pieces of my background to help support future teachers in supporting the children in their classrooms and learning about how our planet works.
Wonderful. Yeah. And Bryce. Can you wrap that up? What brought you to climate education?
Thank you, Emily. Just like Sarah and Lauren, I'm a former educator myself. Before this position, I taught high school social studies for 11 years. And there are a couple things I noticed in that position while working with students. One, I didn't know the statistic at the time, but there wasn't a lot of climate education. The typical student in the US K-12 is getting maybe 2 hours a year of climate education. I also found that when I spoke to my students about the climate crisis, they kind of fell into one of two camps. They were either very, very concerned about it and anxious and didn't really know how to process it, or they were very apathetic and maybe as a defense mechanism, were just kind of shutting this out. So for those reasons, I felt like, we need to do more with climate education, and that brought me here.
That's great. Thank you. I think everything that you all said, it leads back to how do we address climate change? How do we tackle that topic in the classroom? So I am going to ask, what are the reasons to implement climate education in public education? What are some of the main reasons to do that? Sarah, can you start us off?
Sure. I think I'll start by saying, we see the effects of climate change around us every day, right? We all are. New Jersey is no different. And we've had more frequent extreme weather events, been impacted by poor air quality caused by the smoke from Canadian wildfires. I mean, just within the last 6 months, there are so many things that we can point to. And many of us, through our extended families, also not only are looking at events that are happening right here in New Jersey, but also much further afield, perhaps in other parts of the nation or even in other countries. And so we know that our children are aware of these things, and they're going to be the responsible decision makers as we move forward, right, in terms of how we address this in not even the too distant future. So we feel there's a responsibility to help them develop an understanding of really complex systems so that they can make good decisions and enter the world really ready to make decisions that will be to the betterment of their communities, their nation, and their planet. The other thing specifically for me from the education lens beyond climate itself is the fact that climate change education is one of several exemplary opportunities to do interdisciplinary learning. There's a ton of research that says that interdisciplinary learning is one of the best ways to ensure that as many students as possible have great outcomes in their learning. And this provides us real world issues and opportunities to link the skill building that we're developing in the classroom to specific content in a way that it's a real world application, and it provides opportunities for students to engage in creative thinking and problem solving.
Yeah, I think authenticity is kind of at the core of education to make it relevant for students. Exactly. Lauren?
So I agree wholeheartedly with everything Sarah said earlier. And I think if we want to make sure that the children in our classrooms are well prepared to tackle the problems they're going to face in the future, which include many of the effects of climate change. And here in New Jersey, we see things magnified more than elsewhere in the US and some parts of the world. Our waters are warming and rising more quickly. I don't think I need to preach to the choir on what some of those effects are. But our future economy is going to depend on having a workforce of people who can maintain solar panels and wind farms and think of creative solutions that none of us can even dream of. So having opportunities to engage in interdisciplinary learning, problem solving, solution building, really creative outside the box type activities that discussions around climate change lend themselves to allow us to think about students who will have that problem solving, solution building mindset into the future and be ready to tackle what the world's going to look like down the road, because we don't really know what that is. And I think when we focus on these climate solutions, even with our youngest children, the anxiety around the devastating effects of climate change goes down as well. If we're thinking about and discussing the solutions that already exist and imagining creating solutions into the future, we allow ourselves to have hopeful mindsets and to focus there rather than really sit in the effects of what's happening around us in terms of destruction.
That's a great point. Focusing on solutions and equipping students with the tools needed to tackle things that they're going to face, especially now and with climate change. Exactly. Bryce, what about you?
Yeah, I think like Sarah said, students, young people in general, they're being bombarded with images of the climate crisis. So it's not that they are completely unaware. They're not unaware of the climate crisis. It's not that they're not really getting a climate education, but they're getting this informal kind of like hodgepodge of messages. And we don't really know if those messages are age appropriate. We don't know if they are based in science. And kind of like to what Lauren was saying, are they solutions focused so we can address the climate depression and anxiety that young people are feeling? So I think the role of public education is to formalize this climate education and make sure that young people are getting these messages in a, again, age appropriate, science-based, solution focused way.
That's great. I think we can all agree that it needs to happen. It's important for students to have those skills and tools ready to tackle what is to come. Kind of going even further, kind of like the can it and how do we do it? So Sarah, why do you think New Jersey has been successful in implementing climate education compared to other states?
So I think I would begin by saying that there is tremendous support and there are champions for climate change education that are really, it's important to note, right? So our governor, our first lady, our commissioner of education, all have stood up and said, this is an important thing for us to do, and we need it to be embedded in our standards. We've had a state board who has adopted those standards. And in the background, over the last couple of years, there have been an entire office, 2 offices full of people at the DOE who have worked on thinking deeply about how to responsibly and age appropriately embed climate change education in our learning standards across all content areas. So really, I think a big piece is commitment, right? So one piece of our success is commitment. Another piece in terms of, how we move forward is that we have tried to take the approach of saying there are lots of different ways that you can do this, and that those ways should be localized and specific to your needs, right? So we're making recommendations about where you can implement, and then we're saying to districts, please go ahead and find the ways that best meet your needs to do so. Because as we all know, while this is a macro issue, it's also really a micro issue, right? Even within a given community, the way that they might be experiencing something like stormwater overflow could look really different from one neighborhood to another, and in some cases even from one block to another. So what a specific school needs, or what a specific district needs in terms of the way that it approaches, they need a lot of room to try things out and innovate. And we've tried to do that through the various ways that we've begun to implement the standards.
That's great. I think flexibility is important there, giving tools, but saying make it your own. To the school districts. Lauren, coming from, I guess, kind of the other side of things, supporting educators, the teachers to implement that in their classroom, how do pre-service teachers feel about climate education? What do those discussions look like? What do you think they need?
So I think what they need is a really good sense of what the requisite knowledge is to understand climate change education. So all adults should know what climate change is, what the causes are, and how humans are responsible for pieces of this, right? That's background knowledge that we should all just sort of know. But then how does that fit in to the classroom? And here in New Jersey, we've made the bold move to say we're taking all children seriously, as young as kindergarten, and we're making sure that they have the foundational knowledge to build upon to eventually tackle those complex problems that they're going to face. So in one sense, it's really looking at parts of the existing curriculum. And if you look at the standards here in New Jersey, they're written in a way where they fit into things that we're already teaching. So for example, in 3rd grade geography, when we're looking at maps of our state or maps of coastlines, how do they differ? How do they change over time? If we look at photographs from 20 years ago and 100 years ago and today, and we compare those to the maps of our state, how have things changed? And have some of those conversations that are totally appropriate and fit into the existing curriculum to make sure that our first and our second and our third graders are building all that background knowledge so they can help put those pieces together. And again, as Sarah said earlier, that hyper-local focus. In some areas, we're seeing increased incidences of asthma and allergies in children. Things are staying in bloom a lot longer, and they're blooming at different times. So we might experience some things in our bodies that are a little bit different and unexpected. Talking about that, explaining that sometimes when weather is hotter for longer, the way the world works changes, and that affects our bodies and who we are. And I think when we can connect things to our school, our town, our families, and our bodies, then we really have a personal connection to the topic. And we're ready to think about how those local and personal experiences connect to the broader global issues.
I think that's a very important point of making it relevant to students in their community. They see themselves as a part of it and not this idea that's out of reach for them. I think that's important. I think in making teachers aware that you can make it relevant, it's not this overwhelming topic for them either, and making them feel comfortable, tackling the topic. They have to be comfortable in order to be able to, teach it to students. I think that's very important. Real quick, Bryce, what do you think the role of an NGO is in supporting climate education?
I think it makes me think I was in a meeting yesterday and we were talking about how to scale anything, but we were talking about scaling climate education. And one of the things in this meeting that we learned was that you need to have success stories or champions. And so I think in an NGO, in my role, one of the things we can do, and we're doing it right now, is to bring attention to those success stories and to show how that they can be modeled elsewhere. The other avenue is we can support policy, advocate for policy. Sarah talked about the governor of New Jersey supporting climate education. We would like to see all the governors on the Governors Alliance on climate change to agree to have climate education, to sign some form of compact that says that they're ready to bring this to their states and to their students.
Great. I think that's a good point to kind of turn over to the streets of DC and see what people know about climate education. Hello, I'm Emily on the Mall, and today we are seeing if people have done their homework on all things climate education. Let's go find them. Sylvia, I have a question for you. What is climate education, or what do you know about climate education? What is climate education?
Education about the climate?
Honest answer.
Education around things that you can do in pro of making things day to day that improve the climate change or against the climate change.
Yeah.
Yes.
What do you know about climate education? What does that mean to you? What comes to mind?
I just know my experience growing up in public school, we were not taught enough about climate change.
How many states in the U.S. teach climate change or climate education?
Definitely less than half of them.
What do you know about climate education? Where is it taught?
Nowhere right now that I can think of.
I would say there's definitely not enough education going around to educate people about the impacts of climate change or what we can do about it.
So you think policy for public education needs to change?
I definitely agree.
Okay, well, you heard it. Would you like to spin our wheel? Spin the wheel, Andrew. Can you tell me the definition of climate change, which is different than climate education?
Climate change is the change in our climate over the years. Or something.
Not bad, not bad. Okay. Can you please spin our wheel of words? What is advocacy?
Going to bat for somebody.
You heard it. Today we learned some very interesting things. I'm going to rate us a solid C+. I think we could learn a lot more about climate education in the US and what needs to happen to mitigate climate change in the future. We can do better. Thank you, Emily. So watching that video and what people had to say, what were your thoughts? Sarah, do you have anything or any ideas or thoughts about what people had to say in DC?
Not surprising. We have a lot of work to do. I mean, even here in New Jersey, where we have standards, we have a tremendous amount of work to do. There are competing messages, right? There's a lot going on in our world. Messages can get lost, or we can just be focused on other things. So I'm not surprised, but I believe that we are in a place where, thanks to opportunities like this, we can kind of redirect, refocus, and begin to work in a more organized and coordinated fashion towards the good.
I agree. Lauren?
Yeah, along those same lines, I wasn't terribly surprised. I work with college students, and it's very interesting that students who were typically activist types or science types may have received more climate education in high school than others. And I think that's a little bit unfair. And I think that really hammers home the emphasis on this interdisciplinary learning and knowing that climate change is not just a scientific problem. It's something that affects all disciplines. So hopefully into the future, the answers to these types of questions will be a little bit different.
Bryce?
I think you could tell from the responses that there's an appetite for learning more about this, and that, kind of now's the time. And if you just go talk to people about this, they're interested in it. And I think most people agree that it's time for more climate education.
I completely agree. I think people were hearing things, they knew something about it. But yeah, there's more. They need to know the facts. They need more knowledge. I think people are hungry for it. Definitely. Thinking about next steps with climate education. Sarah and Lauren, this is more for you. Could you tell us what climate education teacher training looks like in your field? What is a template for it? What does it kind of look like? How is it supported? Sarah, do you want to start us off?
Sure. So we're in a space right now where we're building that out. Having just had our English, language arts, and mathematics standards adopted, which give recommendations about where to infuse climate change education, we are at this space where we've just finished 1 year of a grant cycle where we distributed money to schools for them to spend on all kinds of innovative projects. And now we're working on the development of ancillary programs, but then also another round of grants, which will look a little bit different, to better support teachers and districts. So right now it's a hodgepodge. There's a lot of different things that are happening, and institutes of higher learning like TCNJ, where Lauren is working, are one of the places that are engaging teachers, both pre-service teachers, but then also teachers who are in service, who are hungry, because they really are. Folks are really, really interested, and seeking out opportunities for training. And then we're attempting to develop many more opportunities. One area that I think I'll just highlight that we're really excited about is the possibility of using out of school time and summertime programming, and building in more professional development there so that teachers have an opportunity to engage in some creative and innovative teaching play, I'm going to call it, that they might feel less comfortable with doing in their regular school day, because the stakes are higher for them and for students. So we're thinking about how we can structure learning opportunities that are for both students and teachers that might take place in those spaces that, again, are interdisciplinary, that provide opportunities for things to be done in an age-appropriate manner, and that are collaborative across content areas, which can be difficult to accomplish in the regular school day as well.
I think that's great. What you said is it's not just about the teaching the children, it's about how can we allow a collaborative space for educators to also learn because they want to learn too. I think that's very important to kind of acknowledge there. Lauren, do you have anything to add to that?
So yeah, along those same lines, I'm sort of working simultaneously in two spaces, both with the pre-service future teachers as well as with the practicing teachers. So the nice piece with the practicing teachers, the state has generously given teachers in schools some grants. In the last year, as Sarah described, there's going to be more to come. We hosted a day-long workshop for teachers last spring, teachers across the K-5 spectrum. So really just focusing on that elementary school space where a lot of learning is interdisciplinary by nature. And we did some content building as well as time for teachers to be with other teachers from across the state in their grade levels to look at their existing curriculum and look at the climate change standards and really make purposeful decisions about where they might want to tweak things and where they might want to do a whole new unit and change things out. So one of the things teachers really need when they're preparing to implement climate change or any other new standards or ideas is a little bit of time to work with their colleagues and think about what's the best place for them and their students as they're moving forward. It's also curating information. So the state has some wonderful resources on their website. There's also the New Jersey Climate Hub that comes from Subject to Climate, which is a great, easily searchable tool where teachers can find lessons that are tried and true. All of the professional organizations, the National Science Teaching Association, National Council for the Social Studies, National Council of Teachers Mathematics, they have resources that have been vetted by teachers and experts that we can help point them to that they could use in their classrooms to just have good materials. On the pre-service teacher side, that's actually a project I'm currently working on right now. We are building a plan to give some introductory information on how to use the standards and what the science content background is that teachers need to have for future teachers at the beginnings of their programs. And then during their student teaching semester, we're requiring our student teachers to teach a lesson about climate change in their field placements and have some of that experience before they're entering the field. So right now we're working on a series of modules that we intend to share with the rest of the state. Have some generous funding from the state for that. And we're partnering with the American Museum of Natural History as well to help provide some of that science content background to make sure that teachers feel really confident in their own personal knowledge and understanding before they're required to teach this to other people.
I think that's so important, is having resources from all different areas for educators. They feel supported that way and feel more comfortable teaching a topic like climate change. Brace, you're not teaching directly or training teachers directly, but what ways have you found to support teachers with climate education?
Yeah, I mean, at Earth Day, we're calling for climate education. And I think one of the things we need to do then is help show people what does that look like. And we do that, like we create curriculum. I think it's going across on the ticker right now. We create monthly curriculum packets that teachers can use. We also send out a monthly newsletter that discusses the topic more, explains the curriculum, and also highlights teachers who are doing this work. So another example of seeing how this is done and inspiring teachers to do it in their own classes. We are also developing materials that can help them turn any lesson into we call it climate literate lesson. We call it the Climate Literate Lesson Guide. And the idea there is, to circle back to this idea of climate education being interdisciplinary, is you can take any lesson and you can make it a climate literate lesson. So as a former social studies teacher, I may be asked to teach how a bill becomes a law, and I might feel like I don't have time to incorporate climate education into my class, but I could use a case study of a bill about an indigenous group of people who lobbied for a bill that protected their land. And, I could be touching on issues of climate change, and climate justice and climate equity. So finding ways to incorporate into all classes and supporting teachers in doing that. And then we also go to national teacher conferences to share these materials and hopefully inspire teachers to incorporate more climate education.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I think it's important to address this integratively and have supports from all different levels and areas to make this a reality. looking at New Jersey, and we see it happening. It is, being done, the changes. So we do see that it can be a thing in the school districts and done successfully. What do you see for the future of climate education? Sarah, what do you see? What might it look like in the future?
So I think one thing that we see is the development of learning collaboratives that allow for us to bring groups together for shared learning opportunities and to be able to maximize the resources that are available to us. Particularly because part of what we're asking for teachers and for schools and districts to do is to be willing to take the risk of engaging in learning outside of the classroom, right? Like, I think that something that is a non-negotiable piece of this puzzle is that students have to have opportunities for learning outdoors and out in their communities. And in order for that to be done in a way where everyone involved feels safe and supported, that is a community effort. That's not just the school. That's not just the teacher and the crossing guard and the school security. That's everybody. So in order for us to be able to engage in that work, and also for us to continue to keep up with the science, what new things are we learning? How are they impacting us at the local level? We need many players at the table. We need folks from the local municipal government. We need folks from our institutes of higher learning. We need our community-based resources, whether that is like, the lady who lives down the street who is seeing changes in what's happening in her garden, or in how water is draining in front of her house, right? Or all these kinds of people. So the building out of community collaboratives and larger regional collaboratives to support learning, I think, is a really, really big one. I also think and hope that what we begin to see is that this helps to restructure some of the way that teacher learning and planning happens at the school level. We know that interdisciplinary learning works. We don't currently structure school in a way that makes it easy for teachers to do it. Even in the K-5, where Lauren was talking about, we expect a teacher to do it on their own. And that is incredibly overwhelming. And so every opportunity that we can take to create connection and space for there to be groups of people who come together to work on identifying ideas, opportunities, issues, and build those out, that is all to the better of the entire community and to the kids who attend those schools. So those are sort of two really big ones for me.
I think that's great. Yeah, the school as the center, but bringing the community in and the school out. It's all one unit that needs to work together. Lauren, would you like to add anything to that?
I love what Sarah said, and I agree. We need a lot more opportunities for teachers to collaborate within their buildings, with their communities at large. I also think some of the best examples of climate ed I've seen over the last couple of years, especially, has been when the teacher lets the students take the lead and lets the students identify a problem or an issue they want to really dig into. I think that changes the positionality and the leadership in the space of a classroom, and it ensures that whatever instruction is happening is relevant to children's lives. So I think, I'll give an example. I was in a 5th grade class a year or so ago, and the teacher brought up a bunch of different issues their community was facing with regard to climate change, flooding, changing of when plants are blooming, all kinds of things like that. And the kids got to choose what to do next. So they chose to write letters to the principal and the school board and the city council and have these really important discussions as 5th graders who were 10 and 11 years old. That sort of activity is really meaningful. And maybe that's not what the teacher had planned, right? Maybe that's not, maybe they thought they would write letters for something else. Maybe they thought they'd be studying differences in local versus state laws or things like that. But what they did was they zeroed in on exactly the effects that seem to matter most to those children and let them take the lead, which I think is really nice. And I hope we see more examples of that moving forward too.
I think that's great. I think you're both saying that climate education is allowing the students to kind of take back the voice and choice to learning and making it more authentic, and therefore they want to learn it. It's not just consuming information, but they're actively learning, they're engaged. I think that's so important for student inquiry to be kind of at the center of it. Bryce.
Yeah, I mean, I think those answers were very all-encompassing, so I don't have too much to add, but I guess what I would say is what I hope we will see in the future, which is climate education embedded in all subjects, K through 12, and that we look at it sort of the way we look at technology education today. We have computer education throughout K-12. We have it embedded into all classes, and we just understand that that's just a knowledge that young people need to have to be successful. And that's where I hope to see climate education in the near future.
Yes. So we've kind of touched on all of the components. I know there's a lot of questions that people have. So let's go to some questions. Okay, Joe McFadden, how can climate education support students in gaining green skills relevant to jobs in the green economy? How can educators and employers collaborate on more awareness of green jobs? Bryce, do you want to take that first?
Yeah, that's certainly something that we look at a lot here, is the connection between climate education and the green economy. And if we look at the data, there are going to be gaps in a skills gap in people who are prepared for these green jobs. So I think anything we can do with climate education will close that gap. Additionally, I think it's important to think that, this idea that every job will be a green job in the future. So a job, obviously, when I think of green jobs, I think of installing solar panels or charging stations. But also, if you think about a packaging engineer, we want them to have, at Earth Day, we call it green muscle memory, but we want them to make that a green job. And so they have that default where they're thinking about, how can I use fewer materials? How can I avoid using plastic in this packaging?
I love that, green muscle memory. You don't even have to think about it. It's just a good choice for the environment. Awesome. Lavana Grow, are funds available through U.S. Department of Education related to preparing tomorrow's teachers to teach climate-related issues and green job preparation? Sarah, do you want to answer that one first?
I don't know that I can speak to what the U.S. Department of Ed is providing.
Okay.
Lauren may be aware of opportunities.
I haven't sought funding from the US DOE in a while. I know that the National Science Foundation has a lot of solicitations in their Division of Education focused on preparing educators, which is supporting this. Also, the US EPA has environmental education grants. I was fortunate enough to have some funding from them a few years back. But yes, and I suspect as time goes on, things are going to shift in that direction.
And if I can add to that, there are bills that are being put out there. Actually, to come back to New Jersey again, Senator Cory Booker has a green schools bill, and is talking about this. But I don't know if any of those bills have become law yet and made their way to the funding stages.
Janai Call, question. Can you reflect a bit more on how best we can translate scientific climate education to the younger demographics of students grades 3 to 6? That's a great question. Lauren, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, I think I'll just give one example, and maybe this will help situate things a little bit. One of the things we talk about when we talk about effects of climate change is air quality, right? And emissions from cars and other vehicles and factories and things like that. And oftentimes, I think as adults, we go to what's the chemical composition and how do we calculate percentage of particulates in the air and things like that. And that's not appropriate for little guys, right? But little ones know that they cough more when they're riding their bike in the street and there's a lot of emissions out, right? And we can have that conversation with first graders, second graders, third graders, and create more bike to school and walk to school campaigns, for example, where children can encourage people in their community to use vehicles that have those kinds of emissions a little bit less and make their experience a little bit better. And that's something that, again, personalizes that to a child and their own experience in their own life. So I think really getting down to what is it that that kids can connect to in the classroom. Another place, and as Sarah mentioned earlier, outdoor learning is so critical, and understanding children's experiences outdoors is really critical. We can get that to food miles as well. You know, the lettuce that you grow in your school garden and you have at your big salad party at the end of the school year is something that never had to go into a vehicle. It's something you picked yourself and you brought into your classroom and you washed and you ate there. Tracing the map of that Earthbound Farms lettuce that you get in the bag at the grocery store from California to New Jersey is a thing kids can notice and experience and make that connection to the importance of eating local seasonal food. So I really think that at the youngest age, the most important thing to do is to connect to children's lives and their own personal experiences.
Teresa, Leah, how can we ensure that climate education is inclusive and accessible to a diverse range of students, regardless of their backgrounds or locations? So kind of touching on that climate justice component. Sarah, would you like to start us off with that?
Yeah, I think there are many layers to this question, so I'm going to do my best. I think one piece is this idea that we are touching on it in every content area, because that provides an access point for students. Different students respond to different kinds of learning in different ways. And so their ability to plug in, feel connected, feel like it speaks to them, may happen in music class. It may happen in phys ed. It may not happen in English. And so the fact that we will find ways, can continue to find ways to support teachers in embedding climate change education in those spaces provides an entry point for students who might not get it otherwise. That's one. Two, we have to continue to work to identify resources in multiple languages. We have to work with our bilingual teachers around supporting them in implementing climate change education as something that is a critical and important piece for them. Three, we have to be very cognizant of the fact that there are different needs in different communities. And this is going back to why we tried to structure our grant programs with minimal restrictions, because what students and teachers need in a Patterson, a Newark, a Trenton looks different than what students and teachers in a Ridgewood or a Barnegat, New Jersey need. And so as a result, and for those of you who don't know those places, that's very hyper urban to rural or suburban. And so our limiting the amount of structural, what's the word that I'm looking for? Roadblocks that we put into place is a way of us trying to ensure that we create the space that you need in order for you to be able to design something that will work for your local community. So I think that's a start. Like I said, it was a big question, but thank you for it. It's an important question.
That was great. It was a great answer. Okay, one last question. Lavana Grow. Is there much pushback by region from parents, school boards, etc., to teach about the climate crisis related to issues for teaching in light of the politically polarizing of climate change? Oh, that's a good question. Bryce, do you want to kind of start us off with that? Do you have?
Yeah, sure. That's a question, big question to unpack as well. But obviously, there is a political component to this, and I think that that's something that is probably holding us back from having climate education in all 50 states. And, just the structure of education in the United States, we're a federal system, so it's going to be state by state and then community to community. So I think that exists. That's one of the reasons why we think that talking about preparing young people for the green economy is a good approach, because having a healthy economy and having jobs, preparing young people for those jobs is something that I think, regardless of people's politics, is something that we all want. And regardless of politics, you can look and see that we have massive solar farms and wind turbines going up. And I also think just, there are ways around that, with the politics. Of course, it would be great to have all 50, states Puerto Rico, everyone sign on to climate education. But when that's not possible, we can kind of get into the community level and speak with districts and speak with administrators and teachers.
Awesome. Is there anything to add?
I've had a little bit of experience with this. And it's, I think part of it is really just making sure that we're clear that we're using factual information, that we're connecting claims to evidence using reasoning, just as we do at every good social studies and science class, when we're the adults sharing information with the world. And that we're also starting with kindness. I know this sounds a bit silly, but I did have a teacher who attended some workshops we had. I didn't know she was a climate denier. But at the end, she talked to me and my colleagues and said, "You were really nice to me. You didn't try and force a political agenda. You just told us the information, and I was able to change my mind." And I think sometimes when things are super politicized, it's really easy to get emotional and angry about things. But when we're talking about factual information, it's important to lead with kindness sometimes, and we might turn a few minds around that way too.
I love that. I think kindness is the perfect approach to anything. I think definitely educators in general like to lead with kindness, especially dealing with students. Wow, that was wonderful. Okay, I think we're going to wrap up our discussion. There were some big takeaways today. I think we can all agree that climate education is needed and can be implemented in states. And there are some different ways we can do that, but support is needed at all levels to kind of make it successful. And I appreciate you all being here today and hearing your wonderful work and just your points of views on things and your experiences. So thank you so much. And I hope you have a great rest of your day. Thank you, everyone.